All right, so you just saw the example of Rossum Foods, right, illegally selling unpasteurized milk and the consequences that resulted from it, which is that police officers showed up with guns drawn to shut down this business. And you could say, and I think people make a good point, that drinking raw milk probably isn't the best decision in the world. Okay, there are known and pretty significant health consequences that can come from that. But the question that liberal dream folks would put forward would be: there's lots of risky things that people engage in. Why is it the government's job to protect me from risks that I'm willing to take on? So, for example, hang gliding is dangerous, but we don't say you can't hang glide. Surfing is dangerous, but we don't say you can't surf. Um, Skydiving is dangerous, but we don't say people can't skydive. People free climb mountains, right, where they climb up mountains with no harnesses or anything. That's extremely dangerous, but we give people the freedom to do that. And so these liberal dream folks would say, why are we limiting someone's freedom in this thing? And the fear would be, all right, so we start by saying you can't drink raw milk. Then we start limiting other risky things, right? Milkshakes aren't good for you, so we probably shouldn't have those. The nachos from Tanya's I mentioned earlier, those aren't healthy, so we should limit those. And then maybe we should start, instead of just eliminating bad things, now we're going to start implementing that you have to do good things, right? So you have to eat a certain amount of vegetables per day and stuff like that. And then, we're going down this road to serfdom. This is the fear that folks like Hayek have, and also the fears that people like Ron Paul, who you saw in the video, who is very famously a Gettysburg alum, fears that he would share as well because he is libertarian in orientation and aligns with this general liberal dream perspective. All right, so building on uh, this idea that markets promote freedom, these folks are also going to argue that free markets are the best way to have our individuals' needs and desires satisfied, and thus are going to promote happiness. Because if I'm able to choose what kind of goods I consume, right, or what job I want to take, presumably I'm going to choose the ones that are most desirable to me or the most beneficial to me. Now, maybe I'll be limited or I can't have any job in the world, but at least I have the ability to choose between a handful of them. And the same is true when I go to the grocery store. I don't have unlimited money to spend. But if I have $20 to spend, I have freedom to spend it on whichever combination of goods that I want to. And I'm much better able to make these decisions in terms of like personal consumption than would be someone really distant in a government office somewhere. And then also, another aspect of this is that free markets can protect against the concentration of economic power and political power. In general, in the US system, right, the government has lots of political power and they can have some regulation of economic matters, but the government cannot also own and control uh, individual businesses. They can contract with them, but they can't own and control them. And that's important because if someone could both own and control, not just political, or have the political power of, say, the presidency, but also be able to control the entire economy, that would very much open the door to someone being tyrannical and trying to control every aspect of our individual life. Now, economic actors might be in their self-interest for them um, to try to be dominant in a particular space and to try to control and monopolize, right, certain products and certain goods and services. These folks are only going to worry if a monopoly comes about through legislation or not. If it comes about through legislation where there's a law that you can only buy product X from this supplier, they're going to worry about that because that legal protection means that monopoly cannot go away. In contrast, if we just get a natural monopoly, there might be a monopoly in practice, but in theory, it's always possible for someone to come up with a new and better invention that could get rid of that monopoly. So there might be a new business that maybe makes the same product but a lot cheaper. And what was once a monopoly, right, is now broken up because of this other supplier, and then we have market competition again. Or someone could invent something completely new and different that renders what was once a monopoly obsolete. The famous example of this was that there was a time when I believe it was AT&T had close to a monopoly on telephone lines in the US. And AT&T was sued by the government that claimed it was a monopoly. And in general, people don't want monopolies because they can, of the political and the economic power that they have. And so the government broke AT&T up into a whole bunch of different companies referred to as the baby bells. And I think there was like 6 or 8 of them at the time. If I'm a liberal dreamer and I see AT&T acquires a monopoly on telephone lines, and they do so just based on being a better provider of telephone service, as opposed to a law saying you can only use AT&T. If they come about this monopoly naturally, these folks generally aren't going to worry about it. And they would say, they would predict something like which we saw in practice, which is, yeah, AT&T did have a stranglehold on telephone lines. So you had to, if you wanted to call someone, you had to interact with AT&T. But what happened? Cell phones were developed, and this new product allowed people to allowed people to communicate outside of what AT&T did. And so that monopoly went away through free market innovation. So as long as we don't have the political power basically being taken over, economic power being taken over by political sources or being politically protected, then the market is a way of limiting the power of these actors in some significant ways. All right, and then one final reason why these folks think that the free market is so good and why it is moral and makes us behave well is that markets tend to foster creativity. They incentivize innovation in that if businesses have to compete with one another, in general, this means they're going to have to innovate. Part of this could be creating the same product as someone else, but producing it cheaper so you can sell it cheaper. So you're selling a product for $10. I find a new way to produce it so I can sell for $8, right? And now I'm taking away your business, right? Because it's a competitive situation. Then you figure out a way to sell it for $6, right? And now the price is dropping down. So we're competing with one another in terms of price, and the price is being driven down, and this benefits consumers because now they have an extra $2 or an extra $4 they can spend on something else as the price of our goods drops. Or it could be the price of the goods stays the same, but the innovation comes in the form of I produce something that has better quality than what you have. All right. And so for the same $10, you're getting a higher quality good from me as opposed to what you offer. But then maybe you come in and you produce something that's even greater quality for the same price. That's another way in which innovation can manifest itself. And then the final way, and ways that's similar to what we saw with the AT&T and cell phone example, is you could create something completely new and novel that no one's seen before and does new things that people hadn't imagined. And so we get innovation in the creation of new and distinct things. And the way this kind of innovation is often described is in terms of creative destruction. And the reason why it's called creative destruction is, well, the creative part is the innovation part, but often successful innovations in one thing entail the destruction of something else. So the creation of cell phones has, well, not completely destroyed the landline business. It's really, really hurt it. It's really, really diminished. So cell phones had played at least a partial creative destructive role in the economy. Another famous example of this is that the creation of the automobile basically destroyed the horse and buggy industry, except for a few niche populations like the Amish, right? Outside of Amish communities, which are a very small percent of the US population, there are no horse and buggies. People have decided that automobiles are a more effective and efficient way of being transported from one place to another. And so the creation of the automobile destroyed this other form of transportation. And in theory, these processes of creative destruction, well, they do destroy certain things. They create new things that allow us to live better and more fruitful lives. And then another aspect of this that we'll see, particularly in the Cowan reading that you'll have for class either on Monday or Wednesday, is how bigger markets allow for the greater diversity of things and allows you to cater to niche populations. And so you can cater to more particular desires that people have. So as I think I mentioned to some people in our little one-to-one get-togethers, I have a lot of family in Minnesota, and they live in a really small town called Emmons. And if I remember correctly, the population of Emmons is like 432, and my guess is that's on the decline because it's depopulating. So Emmons is a really small marketplace. As such, the businesses in Emmons have to cater to kind of the most uniform needs that people have. And at this point, I think there's maybe like 3 businesses and what was kind of like traditionally downtown Emmons. And my uncle owns one of them. Maybe there's only 2 now. There is a bank in town, and then my uncle owns a gas station. And the gas station also sells like candy bars and soda and stuff like that. But in that little community, most people have cars because it's rural Minnesota, so you need to drive anywhere. So most people have a need for gas. But that's really kind of like that in a bank, because most people need access to a bank. Those are really those are really the only businesses that are viable in a market that's small. In contrast, when you have bigger markets, you can have viable businesses that are only catering to a small subset of the population because that small subset is big enough in big places to allow for a business to survive. So bigger markets allow for greater diversity. And what we'll see now is it is an example of this, of how bigger markets allow for economic goods and services to be targeted to niche populations in ways that are possible in bigger places that are not in smaller ones. And the example that I think reflects this is Lefties, the left-handed store. This is a store that sells products specifically tailored to people who are left-handed, which is about 10% of the population. All right. So they're not catering to most people. You know, at the absolute maximum, they're catering to 10% of the population, but probably not everyone who's left-handed knows about lefties. Right. So they're catering to some fraction of this fraction of a large population. And so it shouldn't be surprising that Lefties is located in San Francisco, a big metropolitan area that's surrounded by and pretty close proximity to other large populations. And they can be viable in this bigger market. Lefties would never survive in Emmons, Minnesota, because there's maybe 40 people who are left-handed, maybe, if that. Probably more like maybe like in the order of like maybe 20 or so. And they could just never sell enough goods to that population for there to be an independent or for them to be a viable business. All right. So bigger markets allow for more niches. You'll see in the catering to niches, you'll see in the Cowan reading, he's going to argue that the creation of a global market, and a global market, not just in terms of things like food, but a global cultural market, allows for innovations to occur and allows markets to cater to really particular interests in ways that would not be possible in the absence of a global economic system. All right, so that's our overview of the liberal dream perspective. What we'll see in class, either on Monday or Wednesday, is the commodified nightmare perspective and how it is kind of the mirror opposite of the liberal dream folks. So where the liberal dream folks want to say the market is good and it makes us act well, the commodified nightmare folks are going to say the opposite, and we'll explore their arguments in class on Monday or Wednesday.